Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now, happy to say, we have the Harlequins Mafia reunited. Sadly, they were just talking about this before coming on air. Never quite got to play together. We never got to see the magic of Wood to Dunne. Back to Wood. Wood has kicked it. What are you doing? I'm the out half. Hello, Keith. Hello, Andy.
I reckon we'd have had an awful lot of fun, you know, at that stage. I think there could have been a bit of crack to be had, you know. Who's to think of it when you look at him that we're not even the same age, you know.
Oh, what could have been, Andy?
Well, I was very excited about it. I joined in 2003, and Woody had obviously kept it to himself, a bit of a secret that he was going to retire at the end of the World Cup. And none of us knew that. So I joined on the hope he'd be my captain, actually. But he retired then gracefully at the end of the World Cup. Did get to meet the lads, Jason Leonard and Will Greenwood coming back. And they were great kind of advisors and older squad members at the time and kind of took over the mantle of leadership. But yeah, it was, I have to say now, show my sensitive side to Woody. I missed out on the chance to play underneath him as a captain, and I was looking forward to it initially.
Yeah. God, I'm laughing at that. You've never been nice to me before, Andy.
Meanwhile, Keith, Simon Zebo, welcome home, kid. I'm sure they're all saying down there, that's great news. Out of nowhere, really. I mean, I guess his contract had been bubbling away, but suddenly it's all this wasn't a protracted willy won't he kind of a thing. It's just suddenly announced. Yeah,
it did come out of nowhere. I only heard about it myself today. So I think it's great news. I think it's a 1-year deal, which I think is the appropriate amount. He either comes back, plays, becomes that senior figure that Andy was just talking about. And it'll be interesting to see what he brings back. Because when you get players that have been away and come back, they do bring an awful lot of the things that they've learned from it. Also, it isn't too long. You know, he hasn't a 3 or 4 year contract, you know, so he's coming back. I think a lot of the young guys can learn from him. And I think he still has a high level of ambition. So I think he'd have to get himself back. I think he's put on weight while he's over there. He looks an awful lot of a bigger man than he was, so he may have to shed a few of those pounds, but he'd be fighting for his position, and I think he wants to play for Ireland. So look, he's back in the country, which means he's available. If he fits into the plans, he didn't fit into Joe Schmidt's plans. If he fits into Andy Farrell's plans, I think it's good all around for everybody.
Andy, he's 31. This 1-year contract co-funded between IRFU and Province. So do you read that as, well, here's your chance now, play yourself into a full-on central contract, and that's what this year is about?
I'm not so sure based on the age profile at 31. I probably lean towards more it's safer to give a 1-year contract. It's more economic that they share the costs. I don't believe they would use that as a carrot to dangle in front of Zebo. I think they'll probably, at 31, they may take a couple more. And given his position, he's an outside back as well. If he was a 31-year-old tight head prop, it's quite different to a 31-year-old winger and fullback. And the contract duration tends to get shorter and shorter as the age profile goes up in those positions. So, I mean, what I would say is I think it's a super move both for Simon Zebo and for Irish and Munster rugby. And when I think there was a huge, when Leinster hit a bit of a period in the from about 99 through to the mid 2000s, they hit a period where they were very much, they weren't quite stagnant, but they weren't winning things. And the likes of Leo Cullen and Shane Jennings went off to Leicester and had a different experience and brought back their experience. And someone like Zebo going away from the Munster setup and coming back in and sharing his experience of different environments and different cultures, that could be quite beneficial to that group, because Munster aren't far away from winning things. They're dead close. They're not quite making that conversion. And it did strike me as a similar type of arrangement when the likes of Shane Jennings and Leo came back in, and they made quite a profound impact on the Leinster culture, and maybe Zebo can help in that way as well, based on the experience he's learned from being abroad.
What about his Irish prospects, Andy?
Well, I think he would very much suit the style of play with which we played against England recently. That high tempo offload game, which we hadn't seen a whole lot of, and just showed how dangerous and capable we are. And I think Farrell, with Paulie in there giving a bit of structure to the set piece, and John Fogarty helping out in set piece and up front, and Farrell and Cat, who are they seem more aligned to chaos and unstructured rugby than Joe Schmidt, for example. And that's why Zebo didn't fit Joe Schmidt's template. But the creativity and the unpredictable way and the talent he's got with which he plays, that suits that style we played against England. So I would have thought if he has a good run, he's right back in the frame.
Keith, a stupid question for a change. Zebo out of contract in this instance, so it doesn't quite apply, but it just got me thinking, these big transfers in rugby. Why have transfer fees never become a thing in rugby?
I think there have been a couple at different times where people have been bought out of their contracts. Mostly the contract length, they're short. They're 2 or 3 years for the most part. Also, the amount of money that's been discussed was not significant. And it is significant to the players, but it's not significant compared to football. And I still think we're a very young professional sport. And I think that's probably more likely the case than anything else. And there's very few people, for the most part, if a guy wants to leave a club, they'll say, okay, if you want to go, you don't want to, off you go. And there has been a few instances, but not many.
So buying out the contracts, yeah, but here's 2 million for Keith Wood. Is that day coming?
I hope not, actually. I don't know that there is that amount of free cash in the game. Like if you look at where we are at the present moment in time and how everybody is suffering financially, you could have. Some of the teams might do it from in France where they suddenly throw out a very large check, but I think it would be more for the person than for the club.
Yeah. Certainly won't be today or tomorrow, that's for sure.
No.
The Lions coaching ticket was announced, Andy. Andy Farrell not permitted by the IRFU. There's still the possibility, it seems, of a 3-test series in Fiji in July, which sounds like a nice way to spend July, I suspect. So in defence, they have Steve Tandy celebrated for his Scottish work forwards. Robin McBride, obviously, at Leinster, and knows Gatland through their Welsh connections. Attack is Gregor Townsend, and kicking coach Neil Jenkins. Is kicking coach the great gig I hope it is? Like, does Jenkins just work with the kickers on place kicking, or is he working on kicking strategy?
I think it is exactly what you say. It is the greatest gig.
Okay.
I know that, for example, Raj was Dan Carter's place kicking coach down in Racing, which I doubt was a tricky job. But, no, I do. I'm a little bit facetious. There is absolutely merit in the role. And I think an example of a kicking coach who had a huge impact on a lot of players was Mick the Kick Byrne, 6'7" Aussie rules footballer, played for Hawthorn and Carlton, and was brought into the Leinster setup way back when by Matt Williams. And what Mick started with was, an incredible ability to display his own skill set because he was good at kicking an oval ball. But he, for example, taught me how to kick a spiral bomb, how to curl a ball both ways, how to kick a ball like a dead rubber. He used to call it a dead duck. And they're all quite different skills. He was very innovative, and he actually went from there he ended up the All Blacks skills coach for 2 World Cup wins, and he's a phenomenal coach. So there is an avenue in there from a kicking skills coach point of view to grow into the role and have more of an impact on how the team plays. In the case of a Lions tour, Jenkins, I would have thought he's got one of the more easy roles in terms of a kicking coach on a protracted 8-week tour. But nice work if you can get it.
Well, he's a Lions legend, Keith, obviously, and you would have toured with him. What kind of fella is he? Will he be a vibes man out there as well?
He's quite. He's a funny fella. I look back on that tour we toured, and in '97, I thought he didn't miss one kick, but he did. He missed a few, but he was an amazing kicker. I don't know if Andy'd say that as a kicker himself, but he was a very relaxed kicker. There wasn't a huge amount of movement on the ball. He knew exactly where he was going. He had a routine, but it didn't look manufactured. He just looked very comfortable when he was doing it all the time. I actually think it's important if you can have that, because it can become essential to how you play. And different people kick in different ways, and it's how does everybody adjust to it? It's not just for goal kicking; it's for different things. And you get to understand different elements. I loved it from the perspective that you'd learn something new. And actually that keeps the guys unbelievably fresh. If they get a tiny little change in how they do something, that for goal kicking, it's very difficult because you don't want to be tinkering with it on a Lions tour. You want to be slotting them over, obviously. But if you can learn something a little bit different, the guys get really excited by that. And so I think he'd be...
Jenkins was one of the first kickers to come from the Dave Allred coaching school, where when you look at a Gaelic footballer taking a free kick off the ground in the mid-90s, and they're kicking the ball kind of around the corner with the arch of the foot, and Dave Allred kind of brought a whole new science. He was like the David Ledbetter coming into golf. He was talking about opening out your hip and actually hitting the ball with the laces and the hardest part of the foot, which optimized kind of the distance and the power. And then he honed it down to get more accurate. And I remember I was 16, 17 in the 97 Lions tour. And I just remember seeing Jenkins kicking with, obviously in a high altitude setting, it seemed to be traveling with greater ease, with traveling in straight lines. Before that, you'd see a lot of kickers curl the ball over in different directions. He was kicking the ball through the post in straight lines from every angle. So that Dave Allred approach basically broke down the kicking technique, took away some of the variables, and said each kick is the same, regardless of the angle. And you open out the hip, you approach it a different way and use the hardest part of the foot. And from that Jenkins era, you got all the crouching and Johnny Wilkinson cupping his hands and staring at the post. But Jenkins was a complete outlier. He started that whole process around that period of time. He was the original poster boy for the likes of Allred.
Strangely, I know we've drifted again, of course, as we invariably do in these conversations. In 2001, Aldridge came on tour with us, and so he was the kicking coach in 2001, but he was also the catching coach, and he had gone off to Gaelic football and come back to say, try and catch it this way and this way and this way. The Irish guys thought this was so natural for us, but it was really interesting how, again, different players from different countries would look at that very differently. The idea of catching the ball above your head just didn't occur, to most rugby players, but for GA players, of course, that's where you're supposed to catch it, So, but he was bringing all those things in as well. So, again, as I said, it makes it really interesting because you learn something new and you get excited by it.
Andy, one last step in this tangent we're taking, and I'll bring us back to the Lions then. Of the contenders for 10 for South Africa and the Lions, Finn Russell and Sexton and Farrell and Dan Biggar and anyone else I'm forgetting to think of at the moment, who's the best kicker for you?
Of all of those you mentioned, probably Sexton or Dan Biggar, I would say maybe. I think the way Dan Biggar strikes the ball is phenomenal. And I think on form then Sexton and Farrell are maybe just tucked in right behind. I probably have the added advantage of Dan Biggar Dan Biggar's around a long time. At the tail end of my career, he was starting off. And he was one of those kickers that he kicked people talk about the way Beckham struck a corner, and you just knew it sounded different, it flew differently. There was an integrity to the quality of it or the kick. And Dan Biggar struck a ball, it just flew. It was just compact, and the style of it. I was quite taken aback by the quality of his place kicking at the tail end of my own career. I think he's followed it through. Just maybe just behind that in terms of quality of strike and consistency, Sexton and Farrell maybe. But I wouldn't say that would be the decision for Gatland. I'm not so sure he'll decide based on place kicking prowess.
No, and we'll come to that in a second. So in broad terms, obviously 2 Scots there in the coaching ticket in Tandy and Gregor Townsend. They met at a hotel in London last week, I suspect virtually. I don't know whether they all there or not. But anyway, Gatland asked all 4 of them, give me your 36 names. He took 41 to New Zealand, but he said, give me your 36 anyway. And the word is that 20 to 25 unanimous names were on everybody's sheets. All in all, they discussed 57 different players. It seems Kelleher was discussed, Doris was discussed, according to McBride. Gatland made the point, Keith, there'll be more Scots this time around. I suspect, especially so with the 2 Scots on the coaching ticket. But interestingly, he really cited the fact that they had won away in France and won away in England in this year's Six Nations, albeit without fans. And down the years, he's often said, look, I put more weight on away form, and Scots haven't delivered away from home. So they've turned that around this year. So the Scots, for the first time in a long time, may not be given out on May 6th.
No, in fairness, it wouldn't be hard for them to be more Scots than there normally is, because there's been precious few over the last number of Lions tours. So I think there is a chance for more Scots, and I do think their performances showed different things. I also think the Six Nations was very unusual. So for the amount you read into it, do you read in that some players have dropped out of form or dropped out of fitness to go on a Lions tour? It was funny reading some of the papers over the last couple of days and some of the English papers, and Ian McGeechan today, he picked his Lions squad, which I thought was all over the shop. But the idea of looking back on 4 years ago as to how good they were 4 years ago as a guide for selection, that's a hard one. So I think there will be more Scots because they have shown different things. I think the idea of Finn Russell becomes very interesting. I find him an infuriating player to watch because, and yet we keep saying we want more excitement. And yes, he definitely has excitement, but he also has times where his brain goes west and, anything could happen. So whether you want that in a Lions or not, but with his coach, and when you think back to 97, Gregor was playing 10. The more conservative 10 was Neil Jenkins, and he was a bloody good 10. But Gregor was different. And still, you picture 10 at 15, and Jenkins was a poor 15. Like he didn't actually quite know what to do at times. And some of the kicks that were coming down on him, he didn't come within a postcode of where they landed. But he was magnificent, and he's the reason we won, So it's trying to get the right players on the field. You get them on the plane first, and then get them on the right guys on the field that make it work. And it worked for us, and we were lucky. And
how did the Irish do in McGeechan's squad?
Yeah, there weren't many. I don't think there were 3 second rows. He had James Ryan, Henderson, and Ty Byrne. Which I think that could be interesting. It depends on the numbers, is exactly how many we have out there. We definitely had Tyg Furlong.
Did he have Sexton?
Did he have Sexton? I think he didn't have Sexton. No, I'd have to remember. I didn't give it full study now, if I'm honest.
You took a glance at it and said, this is all over the shop.
I thought it was all over the shop, actually, yeah. So.
To what extent will Gregor Townsend, because he is attack coach, do you think, Andy, will he just be told, you dictate how we're going to attack, therefore you get a huge say in selection, therefore you get a huge say in who the out half is, because that's the on-field general, do you suspect? I know that's a difficult question to answer because this can come down to force of personality as much as anything else, but would you read into Gregor Townsend that we will now have a better than evens chance of Finn Russell at 10?
I actually think, I would have thought that decision, it comes down to how willing Gatland is to share responsibility. I mean, and his history would suggest he's very willing. He's not typically been known as he doesn't lead in a dictatorship. He's big into that empowerment of his coaches and empowerment of his players, and he would, from a specific coaching point of view, he's not dishing out micro detail really at any level. And right back to at the start of the conversation, we mentioned kind of 2003. That season I went over to England, he was coaching Wasps. And Wasps being in London, I became friendly with a couple of the players, and they used to comment on how there was such an obvious lack of detail in a lot of the coaching sessions. They put huge emphasis on physical preparation, optimizing your mindset, your physical approach, not hugely focused on micro detail in terms of execution on the field and tactics or technique. And I'm sure he's evolved a lot since then. He's been hugely successful, but he does seem to empower his staff around him and his players. So in that sense, if Townsend is given a brief to really have influence on the attack of the team, there's probably is a greater chance Finn Russell's involvement, provided they've actually kissed and made up.
I was just going to say it, Andy. That makes it really interesting, because if he doesn't go, does that reignite the argument that
yes.
we don't know.
So, yeah. Well, I heard Gregor Townsend interviewed on 5 Live during the Six Nations, and he was effusive about Russell and talked about how he absolutely has developed into a test out half. And could he go on the lines? He was asked. Absolutely, like effusive. Now, he's his head coach, and at that stage, you have to be effusive. Maybe it's a different conversation when you're going as part of the ticket. But
he doesn't fit the mould of a Northern Hemisphere out half. He's always fit the mould of a Southern Hemisphere out half, where in the Northern Hemisphere, we look at Finn Russell and say he's a talented flake. In the Southern Hemisphere, they say he's talented and he doesn't need to take on the entire responsibility of running the team at all times. And that's a total different philosophy they have down south. You know, James Hart played an Irish lad who's now playing in Biarritz, who joined Munster a couple of years ago. He played 9 in Racing Club with Carter at 10, the greatest out half maybe ever, certainly in the professional era. And what was he like, James? He never said a word. He just walked around. He just did nothing, except occasional brilliance, and made his tackles and passes. He's a very different style. Raj, Johnny Sexton, Owen Farrell, they never shut up. They're angry. They're demonstrative. They run the entire show. Finn Russell doesn't fit that mold. So sometimes in the Northern Hemisphere, he doesn't seem to fit the overall idea, but he could be the ideal foil going down to South Africa to break the game up and be creative.
If they bring 3, Keith, are we saying Farrell, Sexton, Russell? We leaving out bigger? Is that where we are?
Yeah, they could bring 3.
Might bring 2?
They might bring 2 and bring Farrell as a centre, as a 12, which can happen, or vice versa. And it happened at the last time and it worked very well. To be honest, I think when I look at this, I was doing something earlier on and we're just having a conversation about the lines. I think when you play against South Africa, you have to match as much of their physicality as you can, but you need to try and play smarter. So you need to move it away. You can't go for one-out runners all the time. You really need to shake up the game a lot. And I think as many playmakers as you can have, I think that suits you. I think you're a better player. The Lions have to play smarter than South Africa. I don't think they can bully them off the field. I think they have to try and meet and stop as much of the big power game as they can. But they need to think their way around the field. And for that, you need playmakers.
One last one in all this. I saw New Zealand are now vaccinating their Olympians. Obviously, New Zealand are in a pretty healthy situation on the COVID front. Gatland yesterday, I mean, I don't think it was an aggressive, we must be vaccinated type call, but he did say, look, we could all get vaccinated before we go out. That'd be a real boost for the playing group and the way we probably operate on the tour. It does pose an ethical dilemma, probably a PR one as well, skipping the queue versus vulnerable people. But then maybe you argue, well, the entertainment for the masses or for those who are interested in sport comes into it. Where are you on all that?
Well, I think it's different. It's actually different between the UK and Ireland. So I think I've lots of friends that are in their 40s getting vaccinated already. It'll be 30s in the next couple of weeks anyway. We're a little bit behind that, but I do think it'll happen as it's happening ordinarily. I think it becomes a very, very sensitive conversation to have here if we're getting people who haven't been vaccinated and you get elite sports people being vaccinated for it. And I can understand that. And in fact, that isn't the way it should be. But I think we've plenty of time between when they meet up and they're going over to be vaccinated. I think by the time it gets to it, especially they're going to be based in the UK, I'm going to say that all the people at that age group will have been vaccinated at that stage, give or take. So I think it becomes less of an issue with it.
Yes.
Very sensitive today, because if you've somebody who's 75 and hasn't been vaccinated and they see some of the Irish rugby team getting vaccinated for it, would they be peeved off? You're dead right they would, and justifiably.
Maybe when they're at their camp in London, they'll be getting some of the British share as opposed to the Irish share. That's how they'll do it.
Well, I think it could be something like that. But I also think it's a few months down the line.
Sure. Although it's, Jesus, creeping up on us. May 6th, that's when the squad's announced. So the Heineken Champions Cup semi-finals, that's the weekend before Thursday, the May 6th. That is the last opportunity for anyone to stake a claim who hasn't otherwise. Leinster against La Rochelle. Andy, the Leinster performance at Sandy Park being talked about right up there, comparable with any of their great victories in Europe down the years. What jumped out to you about it?
I think their composure and their game management, they looked like a team. Not that this exact Leinster team has won lots of European Cups, but they looked like a team that had an expectation or a culture of success. To go 14-0 down in the manner in which they did, and it looked like there was a little bit of a shock to the system, but it ultimately looked like water off a duck's back. By half time, they were back in the lead, and they just looked supremely confident in the fact that they had a process with which they could use to get back into the game, and they could build it step by step. There was no rush, there was no panic, there were no wild decisions. They just played, at times, sublime rugby, where the execution was just so good on small details that they climbed their way back in piece, and it looked like the entire team was comfortable with that approach. There was no evident chase, even though they were 14-0 down away from home to a team that's just won the double. There was a moment with about 7 minutes to go where they had a scrum on their own line. Exeter, you looked like some kind of scene for the Pamplona, the Bulls. There was guys cleaning their studs. Exeter were ready to go in and destroy that Leinster scrum. And Leinster simply got set, really nice, stayed still and tight, and absorbed that Exeter hit, and had a fast Channel 1 delivery where Jack Conan had the ball in his hand, and it had literally was running directly at Simmons, the 10. I would say within 1 second of the ball leaving Luke McGrath's hand to feed the scrum, Jack Conan was making contact with Simmons. It was an absolutely incredible moment where they just showed their class, their ability to read the situation. They absolutely did not need to enter into a physical fight with Exeter in that moment in the game. They could have done it earlier. They chose to do it at different times. At that moment, they needed to disarm Exeter, and they did it in a split second. They gained momentum. The ball was passed back to Lowe, and he cleared. He actually made a slight scuff on the clearance, but they were 30 yards downfield with the minimum of fuss, but it was the maximum of intelligence. And that type of stuff, when you see it executed well, is beautiful to watch.
They're now very much ensconced as favourites for the tournament, Keith. So Gibbs and O'Gara are plotting.
Yeah, I think they should be favourites for it. I think Exeter have struggled with the mantle of being double champions of last year, and they've accepted that several times, and they've got really peeved with it themselves several times. I thought for me that's the best Leinster have played in quite a while. I thought Conan and Furlong were fantastic. I thought Ross Byrne when he came on. We've talked about it in the past that he hasn't really bossed a game. Now, they were on the front foot, which is very hard against Exeter to be so, but he attacked an awful lot more. There was the lovely, for Larmer's second try, he passed it but he passed it at just the right time, and I thought they looked incredibly impressive. It was nip and tuck the whole way through the game, but they had the composure and they looked really good. I'm just intrigued by what's going to happen when they come against La Rochelle, partly because of Raj, partly because of John O'Gibbs. These guys know, but it's fine knowing. You have to be able to do something for it. So it's whether they can think their way through a plan that will suit and work and have enough discipline to keep their patience, because we do know that Leinster put teams under huge pressure. But again, Andy was just talking about the difference of tens. But the difference of styles, La Rochelle don't mind if the ball goes on the ground. They're trying to offload everything. So none of these things are a major issue. They're going to give up scores. They're not issues for them. But can they get enough past Leinster to get enough of scores to put Leinster under additional pressure, because they can score pretty much from anywhere and they have a cracking set of forwards as well. So I'm looking forward to it as a game. It's one of the great joys of being a neutral observer, is to say, yes, this is going to be something that's fantastic.
Clock's coming against me. Ulster fans are going to give out to me again. I accept the criticism. We will absolutely get an Ulster voice on in the next week or so and get a sense of how they're going, obviously through to a Challenge Cup semi-final. But Ireland are in Six Nations action at the weekend against France on Saturday in Dublin. Our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone, sponsor of the Irish national team of us, everyone in. Keith, I know you did watch Ireland 45, Wales 0. There's only so much you can analyse a game like that. The smallest winning margin of the 4 games thus far is 42 points, and we've had 2 of them over 50 points, and the haves and the have-nots are fairly evident. We talked at length on Monday with Niamh Briggs and Rory O'Connor about professionalism and the sense that it's unavoidable now, it's coming, and it's where the IRFU want to be on that journey and how quickly they want to get ahead of things. I was saying to Niamh, for instance, how would you feel as a player if there were 15 to 20 central contracts and you could prepare at the high performance unit every day and be a professional in a bid to chase down England and have good World Cups, etc.? And she said, yeah, well, to a point, I'm being paid a wage by the guards. I'm not doing it for 20 grand a year either. The sevens often made up of a younger cohort, and it's a more appealing thing. Do it for a few years, travel the world. So it would take more than the 20 grand a year per player. But then again, it will take a fraction of what it would take for the male internationals. And the men's international team generate 82% of revenue anyway. So it's not like many areas of Irish rugby are washing their faces either. So where are we in this? Is that a feasible idea over the next, let's park COVID and recovery, is that feasible over the next 24 months beyond?
I think it's been delayed by COVID because the best laid plans and whatever have been a lot of things have been shelved and there's cuts everywhere. I think there's a huge similarity between rugby when I started and the women's game, where it went to the point when you played for Ireland, there was a bit of a trust fund set up, that there was a small amount of money in amateur days that you could earn for playing for your country. It was kind of like a halfway house before professionalism came down. I think that could be something that would be viable pretty much immediately, so that people can continue to do what they're doing, but be able to maybe allocate a little bit more time and justification for that. And I think that that's a good space. But you would want it to accelerate into a more semi-professional or professional route to it. Ultimately, it comes down to a decision whether it needs to be fully funded by the game itself or whether it'll be funded by rugby and the men's game. And that comes down to a philosophical conversation as to what the IRFU want to do. Ultimately, I think it'll be a mishmash between the two, actually.
Yeah.
But like I remember when I joined Quins, there was a load of guys in Harlequins that were working in the city. A lot of them decided not to go professional at the end of it. It was worth it. It was a pay cut. Why would they do it? And they didn't want to do it. And so I think it comes down to that grey area that we're at. But I do think it'll accelerate far more than rugby did 30 years ago.
What do you think, Andy?
Well, I just, one of the things that is happening around us in the last couple of seasons, not only in Irish women's rugby, but in women's sport on an international level, is the rate of growth is exponential compared to where it was. Now, you could argue in the men's game there's been a very fixed, there hasn't been a growth mindset all that much in that, you're still talking about 7-8 major countries that play the game, and of which maybe 3 are likely to win a World Cup. And you compare it to the likes of soccer and how many countries are competitive, how global the game is. Rugby is behind the 8 ball a bit in terms of scalability. But not necessarily. If you look at the women's game and where we gained a lot of success was the women's sevens game, and you see rather obscure nations being successful in the sevens, in men's and in women's. You've Kenya, I played a sevens game in 2001. We won by 3 points against Chinese Taipei. Thank God, because if we didn't, we'd have been pretty much lambasted. But they were good in sevens. I think there's scope for real growth and scalability, particularly in the women's game and in the international game in the sevens circuit. And I certainly think there's scope there for sponsorship and for the rate of growth is what I initially started with. It seems to be going much faster in the women's game in sevens if you were to counter that with the men's game in 15s, which has been very stable but not moved a whole lot in 25 years of professionalism.
Mm. In the more short term, Keith, France in Dublin on Saturday, what did you make of the Irish performance?
I thought the performance was great. I thought Wales were terrible, and I watched France-Wales as well, and that was they just got bullied off the field. I think the French pack is very good. They played very well, but we have unearthed a star in Bavine Parsons. She's got serious gas. I would think France are too powerful, too good. I don't think you can read too much into the 45-0, apart from the fact that Ireland were very efficient. But France are pretty much professional and very, very capable. So okay. I think that would be a big ask for us.
There's more on this tomorrow. I should tell everyone. 1 o'clock on our social channels, our Six Nations show. Valerie Wheeler talking to Fiona Coughlin and Brian O'Driscoll. So that's tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and they'll be going in depth on this game. Fellas, thanks so much. Andy Dunne, Keith Wood, pleasure.
Thanks, Joe.
Cheers, gents. Mind yourself.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.